Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's jump into today's story. But what if he did agree to it? What would happen then? Stay tuned for part 2, where we dive deeper into Mark's choice and the consequences that follow. Mark stood outside Brooks' Bistro, the weight of Eleanor's offer pressing heavily on him. He could still hear her voice in his head, calm and unwavering, telling him that she could solve all of his problems, that he could finally breathe easy again. But at what cost? Could he really go through with it? Could he marry someone he didn't love, just to save his family, his future? His fingers gripped his phone tightly as he stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had promised his mother that he would keep the family together, that he would find a way. This might be his way out, but was it worth the sacrifice? He looked up at the darkening sky, his mind racing. The next morning, Mark found himself standing in front of his mother's house, the same small house where he had grown up. It wasn't much, but it had been home for as long as he could remember. His mother's health had deteriorated in the past few months, and his sister's college tuition was due in just a few weeks. He didn't have the luxury of time. He couldn't keep putting off the hard decisions. As he stood there, his mother came out the door, her face etched with worry, the lines of age and stress deepening each time he saw her. He had told her he was going to meet someone, but he hadn't told her the details. She wasn't the type to question him, but he could see the concern in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. "Mark," she said softly, "what's really going on?" He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I met someone. She's offering to help us, to pay off our debts, to get us back on track." His mother's eyes widened, but she said nothing. After a long silence, she stepped forward, placing her hand gently on his arm. "You don't have to explain, son, but whatever you decide, I just want you to be sure. You've always been so proud, so strong. Don't let this decision change who you are." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Mark had always prided himself on being the one who protected his family, the one who made sure they were never in need. But now, he felt like he was on the verge of losing himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's offer was more than just about money. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she seemed to see right through him, that made him hesitate. But he didn't have time to hesitate anymore. Later that evening, Mark found himself back at Brooks' Bistro, his heart pounding in his chest as he walked toward the same corner table where Eleanor had sat the night before. This time, he knew he couldn't turn back. He needed this. He needed to make the right choice for his family. He took a seat, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the napkin on his lap. Eleanor was already there, waiting, as composed as ever. She looked up when he sat down, her expression unreadable. "I was wondering when you'd come back," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of something else. "I take it you've made your decision?" Mark nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. I'll marry you. For my family." Eleanor's eyes flickered with something that Mark couldn't quite place. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "Good. I knew you'd make the right choice. But let's be clear, Mark. This is not a fairy tale. This is a business arrangement. A way for you to secure your future, and for me to finally have someone who understands the weight of my name." Her words were blunt, but they didn't feel cold. There was something about Eleanor that Mark couldn't quite figure out. She was both distant and warm at the same time, a contradiction that only added to the mystery of her. He had agreed to this, but he wasn't sure what he was getting himself into. "I understand," he said, his voice firm. "But I need you to know, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for my family. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they're taken care of." "I know," she replied, her voice softening just a fraction. "And I'm willing to help you. But you need to trust me, Mark. This isn't just about money, it's about finding the right person to share a life with, even if that life isn't the one you imagined. As the words hung in the air between them, Mark realized something. He wasn't just making a decision for his family anymore. He was making a decision that would change his life, forever. But he wasn't sure if it was for the better or for the worse. With that thought, the deal was sealed. They agreed on the terms, and the next steps were set in motion. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on here. He was about to marry a woman he barely knew, a woman whose wealth and power had always seemed so out of reach. And yet, there was a connection between them that he couldn't ignore. As he left the bistro that night, the weight of the decision began to settle on his shoulders. But even as he questioned his choice, he couldn't help but wonder what was Eleanor hiding? Stay tuned for part 3, where Mark learns that nothing is ever truly as it seems. Mark woke up the next morning with a knot in his stomach. He had made the decision, but now that it was real, he wasn't sure how to feel. The weight of his promise to Eleanor was pressing down on him, and the uncertainty of it all made his heart race. He had agreed to marry her, but it still felt surreal, like he was stuck in a dream he couldn't wake up from. The night before had felt like a blur. He had signed the papers, agreed to the terms, and walked out of the bistro with his life on a completely different trajectory. Now, as he stood in front of his bathroom mirror, looking at the man who had just made the most significant decision of his life, he barely recognized himself. The sound of his phone ringing pulled him from his thoughts. It was Eleanor. Mark, her voice was steady, but there was something else beneath it, something he couldn't quite place. I need you to come over today. There's something we need to discuss before we move forward. His heart skipped a beat. What is it? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. You'll see when you get here, she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. I'll send you the address. It's important. Mark hung up the phone, his mind racing. Eleanor was always in control, always 2 steps ahead. He had no idea what she was planning, but he knew one thing for sure: it wasn't going to be easy. He grabbed his coat and left the apartment, the chill of the morning air matching the unease he felt inside. As he drove to the address she had given him, he couldn't help but wonder what more there was to this arrangement. What had he truly agreed to? Was this just a business deal, or was there something deeper at play? He wasn't sure, but he had to find out. When he arrived at the address, he found himself standing in front of an enormous mansion, its towering gates and pristine gardens making him feel small in comparison. The house looked like something out of a movie, elegant, cold, and untouchable. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and rang the doorbell. A butler answered the door, giving him a polite nod before leading him inside. The house was just as grand on the inside as it was on the outside: luxurious furniture, priceless art, and a sense of coldness that seemed to fill every room. Mark followed the butler down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. He couldn't help but feel out of place, as though he didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. They stopped in front of a large wooden door, and the butler knocked before entering. Eleanor was sitting at her desk, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up as Mark entered, her expression as composed as always. Come in, Mark, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. We need to talk. Mark sat down, his palms sweating slightly. What's going on, Eleanor? You said there was something we needed to discuss. She folded her hands in front of her and looked at him, her eyes piercing and calculating. I want you to understand something, Mark, she began. This arrangement is more than just a way for you to pay off your debts and secure your family's future. It's also about me. About my legacy. Mark blinked, confused. What do you mean? She leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving his. I've built an empire, Mark. But I've done it alone. I don't have anyone to share it with. No family, no children, no one to carry on what I've started. That's why I need you. You're not just here for the money. You're here to help me secure my future. To give me something I can leave behind. Mark's mind was spinning. He hadn't realized just how much was riding on this. It wasn't just about money or security anymore, it was about Eleanor's legacy. About her need for someone to continue what she had built. And now, he was part of it. I didn't expect this to be easy, Mark, she continued. But I need you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just a marriage. It's a partnership. You're here to help me, and in return, I'll help you. But we both have to be committed to it. Mark nodded slowly, processing her words. He had agreed to the marriage, but he hadn't understood the full weight of what it meant. Now he realized that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. I understand, he said, his voice steady, but inside, he was torn. Eleanor's world was so different from his own, so cold and distant. But somehow, he felt connected to her, even if it was only through this arrangement. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about her that drew him in. As he left the mansion later that evening, his mind was racing. What had he truly agreed to? Was he really ready for this kind of life, this kind of responsibility? He wasn't sure. But one thing was certain: his life was never going to be the same again. Stay tuned for part 4, where Mark begins to realize that the lines between business and love are not as clear-cut as he once thought. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. Every day since his conversation with Eleanor had felt like walking a tightrope. The agreement had been made, the papers signed, and yet, the gravity of what he had committed to was only now beginning to sink in. He had thought he was doing this for his family, but as he sat in his modest apartment, staring at the stack of bills on the table, he realized he was also doing it for himself. For the future he had dreamed of but could never afford. Eleanor's offer had changed everything, and now, he had to navigate a life he hadn't prepared for. That night, Eleanor invited him to an Eventan exclusive charity gala where the city's most powerful people would gather. It was a stark reminder of the world he was about to step into, and the world he had left behind. The lavish venue, with its glittering chandeliers and polished floors, felt like a different universe altogether. Mark was used to cramped apartments and the smell of coffee from a diner, not this world of high society glitz and glam. As he arrived at the gala, dressed in a tailored suit Eleanor had chosen for him, he felt like a fish out of water. He had never been to anything like this before. He was surrounded by people who spoke in a language he didn't understand, discussing investments, power moves, and deals that seemed too far out of his reach. But Eleanor was there, standing tall and confident at the center of it all, effortlessly navigating the sea of well-dressed strangers. She looked completely at home in this world, while Mark couldn't help but feel like he didn't belong. "You look good," Eleanor said, her voice low, as she approached him. She seemed to take pleasure in the way he looked in the suit, as though the transformation was exactly what she had expected. "Just remember, you're here as my partner. We're not here to make small talk. We're here to be seen." Mark nodded, his throat dry. "Got it," he muttered, trying to steady his nerves. He felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. This was his life now. This was what he had agreed to. The night unfolded in a blur of handshakes, polite smiles, and conversations that meant nothing to him. Eleanor moved through the crowd with grace, introducing him to a few key people, but mostly keeping him by her side, like a well-dressed accessory. As the evening wore on, Mark couldn't help but feel a disconnect between himself and the people around him. He had nothing in common with them. Their world was built on power, money, and status, while his world had always been about survival, getting by, doing what was necessary to keep his family afloat. At one point, as they stood by the bar, Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Mark hesitated. "I'm not sure. I feel out of place. I've never been in a place like this before." Eleanor's lips curled into a small smile. "You'll get used to it," she said. "This is your new life now. No more struggling. No more worrying about bills or what comes next. You're part of something bigger." Mark looked around the room, at the people laughing and exchanging pleasantries. He wanted to believe her, to embrace this new life, but something inside him felt like it was slipping away. He had come here to save his family, but now he wasn't sure who he was doing this for anymore. Was it for them? For himself? Or was it all just a game? As the night drew to a close, Eleanor took his arm, guiding him out of the venue. The cool night air hit him like a wave as they stepped outside, and for the first time all evening, he felt like he could breathe. "You did well tonight," Eleanor said, her voice warm but distant. "You played the part. That's what matters. This is just the beginning, Mark." He nodded, but deep down, a question lingered. What was he really signing up for? What would his life look like in 6 months, a year, 5 years? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something much larger than he was prepared for, and the more he saw of Eleanor's world, the less sure he became about what it all meant. As they drove back to the mansion, Mark looked out the window, his thoughts racing. He had never wanted this life. He had wanted security, peace, a chance to build something with his family. But now, as he sat beside Eleanor, he realized that the life he was building was something completely different. He didn't know what the future held, but he was beginning to realize that no matter what happened, nothing would ever be the same again. Stay tuned for part 5, where Mark begins to question whether he can keep up with the life Eleanor has chosen for him, and if there's more at stake than just his future. Mark woke up the next morning, his mind still racing from the events of the night before. Eleanor had been right about one thing: he was starting to get used to this new world, but something still didn't sit right with him. The moment he stepped into the mansion, the weight of his decision seemed heavier than ever. He had signed up for this life, but now, as he stood in the grand foyer of Eleanor's estate, he wondered if he had made a mistake. It wasn't just the luxury that bothered him. It was the sense of distance, the coldness that seemed to linger in the air, like the walls themselves were built to keep emotions out. He had entered into this arrangement to help his family, but now, the more he saw of Eleanor's world, the more he realized how little he truly knew her. As he walked through the mansion's hallways, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Eleanor's life, despite its opulence, felt empty. He had witnessed the way she moved through the gala with such poise, but there was something about her that felt unfulfilled. He had been so focused on the financial security he could gain from this marriage that he hadn't stopped to think about the emotional cost. Was he really ready for this? Was he ready to marry someone he didn't know, someone who seemed so distant, so controlled? He sat down in one of the plush chairs in the living room, his thoughts swirling. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Eleanor. "We need to talk. Meet me in my office at 3 p.m. today. It's important." Mark stared at the message, a knot tightening in his stomach. He had no idea what she wanted, but he knew it couldn't be good. The last few days had been a whirlwind, and now, as he prepared to meet with Eleanor again, he had to wonder what was next. He had signed the contract. He had agreed to this strange partnership, but what was she really expecting from him? Was he just a pawn in her game, or was there more to this marriage than he understood? When he arrived at her office, Eleanor was already sitting at the large desk, her fingers drumming lightly against the wood. The room was just as cold and elegant as the rest of the mansion, with dark wood paneling, expensive art on the walls, and a fireplace that had been lit to warm the space. Eleanor looked up as Mark entered, her expression unreadable. "Sit down," she said, her voice smooth, but with a hint of authority. Mark did as he was told, feeling the familiar weight of her gaze on him. "I know you've been adjusting to this life, Mark. And I know it's been hard for you," Eleanor began, her tone softer than usual. "But there's something I need to make clear. This marriage, this arrangement, it's not just about us. It's about my future. It's about securing everything I've worked for. I've spent years building this empire, and I can't let it fall apart now. I need you to be more than just a figurehead. I need you to help me protect it." Mark nodded slowly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I understand. But what do you mean? What exactly do you need me to do?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her fingers still tapping on the desk. "I need you to be my partner, Mark. Not just in name, but in action. There are people who want to take what's mine. They see me as a target, and they'll do whatever it takes to bring me down. I can't fight this battle alone." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. This was more than he had signed up for. He had thought this would be a way to secure his family's future, but now, it felt like he was being pulled deeper into a world of corporate battles, power struggles, and dangerous alliances. "I never asked for any of this," Mark said, his voice tight with frustration. "I just wanted to take care of my family. I didn't know this would be this complicated." Eleanor's expression softened, just a little. "I know. But this is the reality we're living in now. This is our life. And if you want to keep your family safe, if you want to build a future, then you need to be ready for what comes next." Mark sat in silence, processing her words. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. This wasn't just a marriage for financial security. This was a war. And he was about to be thrust right into the middle of it. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm yet surprisingly gentle. "Now, we fight," she said quietly. "Together." Mark looked up at her, a sense of determination beginning to build inside him. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when his family's future was at stake. Stay tuned for part 6, where Mark faces the first real test of his new life, and begins to question where his loyalties truly lie. The days that followed felt like a blur for Mark. He had entered a world of high-stakes decisions and backdoor deals, a world he was still trying to understand. Eleanor had warned him about the complexities of her life, but now, as he sat at the boardroom table in one of the most powerful companies in the city, he realized just how deep the waters ran. They were in the middle of a tense negotiation, and Mark felt like an outsider trying to find his footing. Eleanor, as usual, was the picture of control, her sharp gaze never leaving the faces of the board members, her words precise and calculated. She moved through the conversation like a chess master, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Mark watched her, feeling the weight of the role he had agreed to play. It wasn't just about helping his family anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. He had thought he was marrying Eleanor for security, for the future. But now, as he listened to the corporate jargon flying around the room, he realized that the world she inhabited was far more treacherous than he had ever imagined. The deal they were negotiating was critical for Eleanor's company, and the stakes were high. There were rival companies, power-hungry executives, and even whispers of betrayal. Mark wasn't sure what he could do to help, but Eleanor had made it clear that she needed him. As the meeting wore on, he found himself more and more unsure of his place in it all. Was he really capable of helping her? Or was he just a pawn in her larger game? After the meeting ended, Eleanor led him out of the boardroom, her face a mask of professionalism. But once they were alone in the hallway, the tension in her eyes was unmistakable. "You did well," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You didn't let them see how out of your depth you really are. That's what matters." Mark wasn't sure how to respond. He had barely said a word during the entire meeting, but the pressure was unbearable. He had always been good at keeping his emotions in check, but this was different. He was in over his head, and he knew it. "I'm just trying to keep up," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this." Eleanor turned to him, her gaze piercing. "You're more capable than you think, Mark. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being strong. We have a future to build, and it's not going to be easy. But if you want to stay in this game, you need to stop doubting yourself." Her words were meant to reassure him, but they only made him feel more isolated. He had always been the one people relied on, the one who took care of everything. But now, in this world of wealth and power, he wasn't sure where he fit. He had agreed to marry Eleanor, but the more he saw of her life, the more he realized how little he truly understood her. She had built an empire, yes, but at what cost? Later that evening, as they walked through the grand halls of the mansion, Mark's thoughts kept returning to the same question: what was this all for? He had come into this marriage with a clear goal: to save his family, to secure a better future, but now, he wondered if he was losing himself in the process. Eleanor's world was intoxicating, but it was also cold and calculating. He wasn't sure how much more of it he could take. When they reached the living room, Eleanor turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "Mark, I know this is hard for you. I know you didn't sign up for this kind of life. But I need you to trust me. I need you to see the bigger picture." Mark met her gaze, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm trying, Eleanor. I am. But sometimes it feels like I'm just playing a part in your world. I'm not sure where I fit anymore." Eleanor's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, Mark saw a flicker of something vulnerable beneath the surface. "I didn't ask for this life either," she said quietly. "But it's the one I've built. And now, you're part of it. You don't have to fit in right away. Just be here with me. That's all I ask." Mark didn't know what to say. He had come into this marriage for one reason, but now, with each passing day, he was starting to question whether he had made the right choice. He had always prided himself on knowing what was best for his family, but this was something entirely different. And as Eleanor's world continued to pull him in, he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to his own sense of self. Stay tuned for part 7, where Mark faces the ultimate test of loyalty and begins to question whether love can truly grow in a marriage built on a business deal. Mark had barely slept the night before, his mind running in circles, the weight of the conversation with Eleanor still heavy in his chest. She had asked him to trust her, but that was easier said than done. Every day felt like a delicate balancing act between being a husband in name and playing a role he wasn't sure he was ready for. Eleanor had been clear about what she needed from him: partnership, loyalty, strength. But Mark wasn't sure if he could deliver, not when he felt more like a stranger in his own life. That morning, Mark stood at the kitchen counter, staring at his coffee cup as he tried to focus. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. It was Eleanor. "Meet me in my office in an hour. We need to discuss something urgent." The message was short, to the point, and left him with a sense of unease. He had learned by now that nothing was ever simple when it came to Eleanor. Every conversation with her felt like another layer of complexity being added to his already chaotic world. When Mark arrived at her office, he could feel the tension in the air, as though something had shifted. Eleanor was sitting behind her desk, but her usual calm demeanor was gone. She looked up when he entered, her face set in a tight, unreadable expression. "Sit down, Mark," she said, her voice sharp. There was no warmth in her tone, no softness. He did as he was told, taking a seat across from her. "What's going on?" Mark asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. The unease in his chest had only grown since the night before. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She stood up and walked around her desk, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. "We're facing a problem," she said, her voice now steady, but with a hint of something that Mark couldn't quite place. "I trusted someone. A business partner who has been feeding me lies." Mark frowned. "Who?" "Thomas Ridgway," she said, her voice cold. "He's been siphoning funds from the company for months now, and I only found out when I saw discrepancies in the books. I need you to help me confront him." Mark's mind raced. Thomas Ridgway? He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the industry, and now, Eleanor was asking him to take on such a dangerous person? The idea of confronting Ridgway seemed like a fool's mission, but Mark knew one thing for sure: Eleanor wasn't one to back down from a challenge. "What do you need me to do?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though a part of him wanted to back away from the entire situation. Eleanor's eyes locked with his, her gaze intense. "I need you to stand by me, Mark. I can't do this alone. We need to confront him together, in front of the board. If he tries to deny it, we'll have the evidence to take him down." Mark swallowed, trying to push down the fear creeping up inside him. This wasn't the life he had imagined for himself. But there was no turning back now. He had made a choice, and that choice had brought him here, standing beside Eleanor, whether he was ready or not. "Okay," Mark said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his head. "I'll help you." Eleanor's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "Good, I knew I could count on you." As Mark left the office, his mind was still reeling. Confronting Thomas Ridgway felt like a decision he wasn't equipped to make, but Eleanor had placed her trust in him. And in that moment, despite all the doubt and uncertainty, Mark realized something. This marriage, this partnership wasn't just about business or financial security. It was about loyalty. Eleanor had brought him into her world, and now, he had to decide whether he was willing to lose himself for her or finally find a way to stand on his own. Stay tuned for part 8, where Mark faces the ultimate test of loyalty and begins to see just how much he's willing to sacrifice for love. Mark walked into the boardroom, his heart pounding in his chest. The tension in the air was thick, and he could feel it in the pit of his stomach. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was ready. Eleanor had asked him to be there, to stand by her side as they confronted Thomas Ridgway. This wasn't just a business transaction anymore, it was personal. Eleanor had trusted him with this, and he wasn't sure if he could handle the weight of her expectations. Ridgway was a powerful man, with enough resources to destroy them both if he chose to. Mark's palms were sweating as he sat at the table beside Eleanor, who was as composed as ever. Her sharp eyes never left Ridgway as he entered the room, followed by his team of lawyers. The sight of him, dressed in his expensive suit, oozing confidence, made Mark feel even more out of place. Ridgway glanced at both of them, his smile smug and self-assured. He clearly thought this was just another power play, another game he could win. But Eleanor wasn't playing games. She was here to win, and Mark had no choice but to follow her lead. "So, Eleanor," Ridgway said, his voice smooth and patronizing, "you've decided to finally confront me, have you? I must admit, I didn't expect you to go this far. But you know, your little company isn't as invincible as you think. You'll be out of your depth before long." His words stung, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She sat tall, her posture unwavering. Mark felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just business, Anna Marie, it was a battle. And in this battle, Mark wasn't sure where he stood. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You're wrong, Thomas, this isn't just about business. It's about trust. And you've betrayed that trust." Her voice was calm, but Mark could hear the steel in it. Ridgway didn't know it yet, but this was about to get personal. Ridgway chuckled, clearly unfazed. "Oh, I see. You've brought your little husband along for backup, haven't you? How quaint. But don't think for a second that I'm intimidated by this little charade. I have more than enough power to shut you down, Eleanor. You're playing a dangerous game." Mark's hands clenched into fists under the table. He had always prided himself on being a good man, a man who did the right thing. But in this room, in this moment, he wasn't sure if doing the right thing was enough. He wasn't sure if he was strong enough to stand up to someone like Ridgway. Eleanor was right. This wasn't just about money or a company. It was about power, and who would hold it. Eleanor didn't back down. "This isn't a game, Thomas," she said, her voice hardening. "You've crossed a line, and now you'll face the consequences. We have the evidence. You've been stealing from my company for months. And now, the truth is out. You can either step down quietly, or we'll expose everything. Your choice." The silence that followed was deafening. Ridgway's face had gone from smug to pale. He clearly hadn't expected Eleanor to have the upper hand. He was used to being in control, used to playing people like pawns in his own game. But Eleanor had outsmarted him, and now Mark could see the fear creeping into Ridgway's eyes. "You think you can bring me down?" Ridgway sneered, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "You're not as untouchable as you think, Eleanor. This won't end well for you." Eleanor's eyes were cold, her tone unwavering. "You're wrong, Thomas. This ends now. And you'll be the one who has to pay for it." The tension in the room was palpable. Mark could feel the weight of Eleanor's words. He had seen a side of her he hadn't fully understood before, the side that wasn't just about power, but about doing what was right. He was proud of her, but also scared for her. This wasn't just a business decision anymore. This was a battle for their future. After a few moments, Ridgway's bravado crumbled. He stood up, his face red with rage. "You've made a mistake, Eleanor," he hissed, his voice shaking. "This isn't over." He turned and stormed out of the room, his lawyers quickly following him. Mark and Eleanor sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Eleanor didn't smile, didn't show relief. She simply looked at Mark, her expression unreadable. "We've won, Mark," she said quietly, but there was a hardness in her voice. "But this is just the beginning. There will be more battles ahead." Mark nodded, his mind still racing. He had never been part of something like this before. He had never been part of a world where power and trust were constantly in play. But one thing was clear to him now: this marriage, this partnership, was more than he had bargained for. And no matter how much he wanted to go back to his old life, he knew that wouldn't be possible. Not anymore. Stay tuned for part 9, where Mark begins to truly understand the price of loyalty and the depth of his commitment to Eleanor. Mark couldn't sleep that night. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Ridgway still buzzed in his veins, but it wasn't just the business win that was keeping him up. It was the weight of what he had just become part of. Eleanor had proven that she was stronger, more capable than anyone had given her credit for, but Mark wasn't sure if he was ready to walk this path alongside her. After the meeting, Eleanor had seemed calm, collected, but Mark knew the fight was far from over. He had done his part, but it was her battle, her empire. As he lay in bed, the silence of the mansion pressing down on him, he realized how much he had changed since agreeing to this marriage. He had started with the intention of helping his family, of securing a better life for them. But now, he wasn't so sure what he was fighting for anymore. Was it for Eleanor? For the life he had promised to her? Or was it for himself, for the chance to escape his past and carve out a future in this unfamiliar world? The questions kept him awake, spinning in circles. The next morning, Eleanor was already up and moving, her usual energy radiating as she walked through the house. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, didn't offer him the comfort he secretly longed for. There was no need for it. She had built this empire alone, and she didn't need anyone's help to keep it standing. But Mark had come to realize that it wasn't just about the company, the wealth, or the power. It was about trust. The trust she had placed in him, and the trust he now realized he had in her. "You did well yesterday," Eleanor said as they sat down for breakfast, her tone still businesslike. "I couldn't have asked for a better partner in that meeting." Mark looked at her, his mind still processing everything. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this, Eleanor," he admitted, his voice low. "This world, it's not what I thought it would be." She didn't flinch, didn't look surprised. She simply continued with her breakfast, as though she had already expected this conversation. "I didn't ask you to be perfect, Mark. I asked you to stand by me, and you did. That's all I ever needed." There was a quiet moment between them as Mark realized the depth of what she was saying. He had been focused so much on his own doubts, on whether he could keep up with her world, that he had forgotten the real reason they were in this together. It wasn't for the wealth or the status, it was for something deeper. They were partners in a way that Mark hadn't fully understood until now. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor stepped out to handle some final business from the Ridgway confrontation, Mark walked through the mansion, his thoughts drifting. He looked at the expensive furnishings, the luxurious decor that represented everything Eleanor had worked for. He thought about his family, about what they would think of him now. He was no longer the man he had been when he first walked into this world. He had changed, but he wasn't sure if it was for the better. He didn't have the answers, and maybe he never would. But he knew one thing: he had a choice now. He could either walk away from all of his wealth, the power, the life that Eleanor had offered him, or he could choose to stay, to stand by her, and build something together. It wasn't about who was stronger, or who had the most power. It was about trust, loyalty, and the connection they had formed. As the evening approached and the house grew quiet, Mark stood by the window, looking out at the city below. He had made it this far, and though he didn't know where this path would lead, he realized he was ready to walk it with Eleanor. Maybe this wasn't the life he had planned for himself, but it was a life that could be his if he chose to embrace it fully. He heard Eleanor's footsteps behind him, and he turned to face her. Without a word, she reached out and took his hand. There was no need for more words. They had made it through the hardest part, and now they were ready to face whatever came next together. Stay tuned for the final part of the story, where Mark and Eleanor discover that love, like trust, is built over time, and that the greatest battles are often fought side by side.